Craig Morgan-Tyker is a poetry critic and a poet. His most recent book is The Trembling Answers, which comes out in April. America's greatest triumph is its diversity, the multiplicity of peoples, identities, and voices all gathered and vitally alive in one country. Nothing attests to this diversity more profoundly than American poetry, which elevates those voices to song. At its best, our poetry refutes hate, represents and finds harmony in difference, counters generality with nuance, and speaks out against injustice. These poets of 2017 represent the best of America, its fierce outrage, its passionate acceptance of divergent ideas and beliefs. I Am Flying Into Myself, selected poems 1960 to 2014. Bill Knott. February. For over 5 decades, Bill Knott 1940 to 2014 was a beloved figure in American poetry, almost in spite of his best efforts. He began his career publishing under a pseudonym, claiming to be a dead poet, named St. Giraud. Toward the end of his life, he eschewed the traditional publishing process altogether, feverishly posting his own poems online and mailing boxes of photocopied pamphlets to anyone who emailed him. All the while, he wrote some of the most brilliant, strange, and subversive poetry America has ever seen. This posthumous selection is an attempt by Knott's longtime friend, the poet Thomas Lux, to organize his legacy and make it presentable. Perhaps something essential is lost in curtailing the chaos that Knott himself created, but we are also profoundly lucky not to have this extraordinary body of work cast into oblivion. One of the many unlikely places Knott was willing to take it, going to sleep, I cross my hands on my chest, they will place my hands like this, it will look as though I am flying into myself. In the language of my captor Shane McRae. February. Shane McRae is the rare poet whose incredible productivity matches his raw talent and the growing appetite for his work. Almost annually, McRae puts out a book of poems as necessary as the news. This new one, his 5th, is his best yet, telling, in 3 bracing sequences, the horrific truth of what it is to be non-white in America. How has it come to pass that I'm on this side of the bars, and you're on that side, he asks, in the voice of a human exhibit in a kind of allegorical sideshow where the haves come to gape at the have-nots under the watchful eye of a friendly yet also oppressive cheaper. Next is a terrifying prose memoir in which a fear compelled me toward the things I feared, that narrates childhood sexual trauma and the dark awakening of identity in a landscape overshadowed by white supremacists. Intermingled are lyrics about Jim Limbert, the adopted mulatto son of Jefferson Davis, and poems that recall recent acts of violence committed against blacks through the persona of a fictional character named Banjo. Yes, it's a painful, essential read, and if McRae weren't so deft with his sense of humor and so poignant with his ironies, it would be unbearable in its revelations. There are more beautiful things than Beyoncé. Morgan Parker. February. Morgan Parker's bombastic second book profoundly expresses a black millennial consciousness with anger and appetite. Everywhere Parker looks, she sees a wildly messed up world. There's far too many of me dying, the president be like, we lost a young boy today. She also answers a personal and public mandate to re-envision it through humor and confrontation, as in Slouching Toward Beyoncé, a hilarious take on William Butler Yeats' famous poem, in which Parker reminds us, things don't fall apart, they find new homes. Magdalene Marie Howe. March. Marie Howe only publishes a book about every decade, but they are all extraordinary. Her latest, her 4th, is wrapped loosely around the story of Mary Magdalene, though, like all of Howe's books, it is primarily a work about suffering and the endurance needed to overcome it. Howe's Mary Magdalene is an everywoman, someone perhaps not unlike Howe herself, living in a recognizable present day, who wonders how to live well, how to make sense of life's adversities. In her voice, Howe asks open-ended existential questions, who had me before I knew I was an I, and ponders, sometimes graphically, sometimes humorously, the depths of sexuality and explorations of love and intimacy. As in the extraordinary poem, On Men, Their Bodies, one penis pressed against me hard almost every morning, but I got out of bed as if I hadn't heard a word it had said. One penis was so dear to me I kissed it and kissed it even after I knew it had been with someone else. In these powerful and accessible poems, Howe advocates nothing so narrow as a particular religious faith. Instead, she seems to argue, loving the world, in spite and because of suffering, is life's great risk, and its reward. The failure of love might count for most of the suffering in the world. Mapped to the stars. Adrian Matejka. March. Adrian Matejka's 4th book is a coming-of-age collage set in Reagan-era Indianapolis, a series of intimate verbal snapshots of African-American youth and family life. The speaker of these poems is caught between lonesome artifacts of the past, 15-cent disco t-shirts, fathers lost in Vietnam, Sun Ra's jazz from space, Star Trek reruns, and hopeful, strange, and complicated glimpses of possible futures, images from Voyager 2, the paintings of Basquiat, burgeoning DJ culture. Mateus whirls these seemingly disparate parts into a stunningly coherent vision of life in the 1980s, growing up poor and black and full of energy and longing. He engages the overlapping cultural worlds that have defined the last 3 decades. A quote from the poet Wallace Stevens follows half a line from old video games, so he seems to run at the mouth, free associating wildly, switching between lingo and higher forms of diction. Nothing's out of bounds or off limits, no culture too pop to find its place in poetry.